So life recall, your life flashing before your eyes at the moment of death. When we talk about the final scene and that theme that Dostoevsky keeps coming back to with the seizures and stuff, we've talked a lot about that. But I wanted to kind of fine tune what my thoughts were at the end because we never really got to it in our discussions through this series. Hopefully you've been following along. If not, playlist down below, of course. In the final scenes, Mishkin is frantically chasing Nastasia. He's visiting these places that she's been, the people that she's seen. Like, where could she be? Naturally, you're going to the places that as a reader, we know that she's gone to. But why? Is this a literary device, a representation of life recall, of seeing all the things that Nastasia has done in life that we've seen as a reader? In 2016, there was a study being done on a Canadian man. I'll put a link to all these sources down below. And what I find particularly interesting in that context is that the man was having an EEG brain scan, looking for brain activity because he was going through seizures, aka the same stuff that Mishkin and Dostoyevsky were going through hundreds of years ago, right? What is so groundbreaking about this scenario is unfortunately that the man had a sudden heart attack and died while the scan was happening, totally unrelated. But this was the first time a human brain was having its neural activity monitored at that moment. And what scientists discovered was that the neural oscillations, like in the gamma wave section, which is usually reminiscent of memories, of recall and such, are abnormal, that they actually increased. So this is the first time that scientists are facing scientific evidence, I should say, that there is an opportunity for life recall to be a thing, that it's not just a trope, that finally we do see evidence that a person may be recalling and facing these memories in their life in their final moments. What would cause that? We talked about in the live stream with Lebedev and some of the arguments for, with Hippolyte and such, that if you're facing your death and you truly believe there is nothing in the afterlife, what would stop you from going on a mass murder spree? Right? You can't jail them. It's not going to punish them. Why don't people do things like that? And I kind of took this as not necessarily a discussion of a person, but a discussion of people. And Dostoevsky was very concerned about Russian people in general. I think he took this as the war for the Russian soul. What's going to happen to Russia with all of these outside influences and this move away from religion in a sense? Because if you truly believe in nothing, nihilism, or even if you're just an atheist and don't believe that there is a God, or agnostic if you're not sure, there's lots of variations. I guess I shouldn't try and name them all. But if you don't believe in Christianity, right? Why do we have this life recall? What's the point of that? And maybe it's just a one-off thing. Maybe it's just strange. Maybe the brain just naturally kicks up in gamma neural oscillations for some reason. But if you have a Christian acceptance of religion, of the afterlife, you believe that at the moment of death, there's this judgment that happens, this moment of grace, if you will. And could there be a separation of, a dualist form of life where you have the body and you have the soul? And is this potentially a discussion of, is there a connection there? Is that a argument from a Christian perspective that you're being faced to live up to what you did in life? And whether that goes on to be a soul, an immaterial afterlife, you're going to have to make that decision for yourself. But why does that happen? But I think that's why this is Dostoevsky's most Christian novel. And I think we've taken a couple different stances on this channel to be transparent. When we were talking about how do we approach Brothers Karamazov, we said we should do this maybe from a perspective of the theory of philosophy, or the philosophy of religion, where we don't accept, one stance, that we try to approach it from both angles. I think for this book, for me, like the theology angle, where you accept the Bible as an argument, has to be brought into the discussion to understand, I think, where Dostoevsky was writing from. We're not the first ones to notice that there were tons of Book of Revelation quotes throughout this, just literally just taken straight out from there. There's this imagery of the horseman and the fourth, black soul to come down during Lebedev's talks and such, that it's very clear that there appears to be, I guess I should say, an intentionality to the Book of Revelation, which is a book about judgment, the final days of man, when our souls are meant to be judged. Now, what that means for you, of course, if you believe in predestination versus, grace, you got to take your own worldview in here. I'm not trying to change anyone's view. I'm trying to interpret it in the context of this book. But the Book of Revelation is meant to be when, from a Christian perspective, God comes down and judges your soul. Kind of like a last recall. Here's all the choices that you made in life, right? The good ones, the bad ones. And nobody knows how those decisions are made. Nobody knows if that decision is going to be made. But if you believe in Christianity and the salvation, there's going to be a moment where you're forced to relive those choices that you made. And that's what's going to impact your immaterial life after that, right? If you do believe in a dualism of a separation between soul and body, there's I'll put a link to this one. I have to go find the study. I didn't pull it up for this chat, but it's making me think now that there was a study, I think in early 2000, somewhere, maybe like a decade ago, where they said that humans were predisposed to be kind of dualist, that we're more likely to assume supernatural forces exist, whether you believe in a god, multiple gods, that sort of thing. Humans are more likely to accept that as an answer than what might be a material answer, right? So we're almost predisposed to believe in a supernatural choice, a separation of soul, if you will. And I think that's kind of where we're going with this. Nastasia, in this final scene, sets off this chain of events of being murdered. She spent her whole life trying to destroy value, trying to destroy herself. And did she succeed? I don't think so, right? You still had people that saw something in her, that loved her, Mishkin, the pure good man. And you had people like Rogozhin that would even go to the extent of killing her. Well, if she was successful in having no value and truly destroying and debasing her point in life, well, why would Rogozhin still experience guilt? Why do these characters that are nihilistic and believe in nothing, what's the point of not destroying versus creating good, right? There's Dostoevsky paints these characters. He has a Christian worldview, so of course it's going to be looking this way, I think, but he does paint, I think, a realistic depiction of humanity, of wanting to do good per se, like allowing humanity to flourish and to have this built-in sense of guilt. And I know psychopaths exist. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm trying to have a higher resolution conversation here, but why have so many humans, I guess, have this form of guilt to take away life, right? Like, what's this judgment that we feel when that happens? And someone commented in our Before You Read video here a couple days ago about the parable of the weeds, about how there's a story about how basically when he's farming, you have the wheat and you have the weeds, right? You have the good with the bad. And is it up to the farmer to judge? Book of Revelations, right? Judgment, worldly judgment, material judgment, what to throw away and what to keep. Crypto and I danced around this constantly, and I didn't want to bring it up to influence people to think a specific way until they had read this book, and then it never happened in our final talk. But should we be the people to judge specifically the characters in this book, worldly judgment? Tolstoy also has a very good, Tolstoy also has a very good short story. I think it's called God Sees the Truth But Waits, and that has to deal with should we be judging people on this earth, or is it God's judgment to place on people? And here I think we see a similar discussion that's happening. Should we be judging Mishkin? Because if we have all these symbols of less recall, of judgment, and symbols of the Book of Revelation, that judgment is coming, and the book climaxes with the battle for the soul. It's not just a battle of what's good or evil on earth. It's a battle for the eternality of the soul. And so many, I know, people who have talked about religion and talked about how it can be so dread-inducing have faced this fear of not being good enough, of I should just give up because I'm never going to get into heaven, quote unquote, because I can't be a perfect person. So I don't think religion can be true because, in some view, this isn't representative of everything, because it's impossible to live a perfect life like Jesus, which I think is true. If you look at the true core requirements of living a biblical life, it's almost, I mean, it has to be impossible, right? Only one person's ever done that according to biblical reckon. Again, theology discussion, not philosophy of religion discussion. Then we see how trying to live that perfect life destroyed Mishkin's material life. But what does that mean from an immaterial perspective? When he dies, will he receive those rewards? You know, when you look at the material desires of Mishkin to save everyone, to love everyone, it destroyed him. When you look at Rogozhin's idea of rejection and almost kind of like negating, he still experienced guilt over his actions. He still had something that forced him to face his decisions, right? Like this all leads to that life recall, that book of revelations of what happens at the moment of our death. And now, hundreds of years later, we're seeing these discussions of immaterialism and dualism. I don't think any of these prove one thing or the other. I think they're just good discussion points. And I think it's important for us to challenge what we believe in life. So do I think always choosing to be good? Do I think living the perfect biblical life is something that Mishkin proves is impossible? I think we already knew it was impossible. I think what you're fighting over is that moment when you are facing that life recall. How happy are you going to be? Are you going to experience guilt for the actions that you did in your life? Whether you want to or not, your body's going to do certain things in terms of experiencing guilt, in terms of facing decisions that you've made. And there's nothing that you can do to stop that, whether you believe in Christianity or whether you say Christianity doesn't exist. Right? If it's all a lie, or whether you believe in Buddhism or these other religions, you got to make your own decision. But it seems like we have these moments, and maybe they mean nothing, maybe they do mean something. But if I were postulating what Dostoyevsky is trying to get across, is that this isn't a battle of the material right and wrong on this earth. It's a battle for the soul. And what happens in life impacts perhaps grace, at least from his worldview, for how he views things. So to me, this was the most important part of Mishkin's insanity. A lot of human emotions lead towards anger, towards revenge. And it's really important, I think, to Dostoevsky that Mishkin didn't crack. He didn't try to kill Rogozhin. Those tears that he shed at the end, the hug, what he saw in her face, it's never fully explained from a literary perspective. Dostoevsky is challenging you, I think, as a reader, to say, what do I see in this scene? And when would I pass judgment versus when do I forgive? Because that's why I said earlier, I think this is his most Christian novel, is it's so heavily embedded in Christian love and grace that his characters almost kind of come off as, I don't want to say justifications, but in terms of this strange Dostoevsky way of enacting grace, you almost get a hopeful view of the life and afterlife because Mishkin was never cracking, never giving in to temptation, to evil, and it destroyed him as a role, at least his material body, in a sense. And I know some people don't like that. That's okay. I'm not here to change your mind. I'm here to kind of try to interpret what I understand of the Bible, what I understand of Dostoevsky in my readings in his biography, ways to interpret this ending because it can be very complicated and very conflicting, right? There's tons of people that have chosen to either join or leave religion as a result of Dostoevsky's writings. And I think that's that recall, that moment of grace of him making you as a reader choose, how do I interpret this? And how do I interpret my own actions against the rewards and the own judgments? And I don't mean to make this like a Pascal wager argument by any means, but I think it is questions that you have to ask yourself as a human being of what makes a life good, which I think is ultimately Dostoevsky's final message in this novel, this Christian novel of what is love and what is good.